try with best I can with everything I've got to end this battle and to return our sons to their desires. Yet, as long as others will challenge America's security and test the dearness of our beliefs with fire and steel, then we must stand or see the promise of 2 centuries crumble.
The American public was continuously misled by the United States government throughout the Vietnam War, completely unaware of the atrocities being committed. At first, the people supported the war effort, but after years of no success, their trust in government significantly decreased. This was due to their realization of the true senselessness of the war, revealed in the Pentagon Papers. They shocked the nation and created a national conversation of what the government's responsibility should be and how the government really acts behind closed doors. The release of the Pentagon Papers had the immediate effect of heightening existing resentment of the Vietnam War, causing a loss of trust in government. This reaffirmed that while it is the government's responsibility to protect the nation, the media must also have the right to expose certain truths. The Espionage Act, passed in 1918, states that any person that makes false statements with the intent to interfere with the operation or success of military or naval forces of the United States will be punished. This is a severe limit to our basic rights, as the Constitution states, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, yet the Espionage Act punishes citizens for certain opinions and reports. In order to maintain the United States' democratic ideals and prevent the oppression of citizens' rights, the Freedom of Information Act was passed in 1966. The act ordered the United States government to make all documents that are not imperative to national security public to the people, creating a more transparent government. Juliette Kayyem, a former Assistant Secretary for Intergovernmental Affairs at the Department of Homeland Security and Boston Globe columnist, provided insight on the issue of classification.
I believe that way too much is now classified in our government. I have been in government. I know it. Things get classified that ought not to be. And so we're constantly need to assess, the sort of balancing between a people's right to know and the need for government to keep legitimate secrets.
Fearing the spread of communism, the United States enacted a containment policy which got them involved in the Vietnam War. The United States continued their Cold War approach to prevent a domino effect of China's communist influence from overtaking Indochina. The United States supported the South Vietnamese against the Viet Cong Communist Party. Initially, Americans supported the troops in Vietnam, but from 1965 to 1971, the percentage of people who thought the war was a mistake rose a staggering 37%. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara ordered a compilation of documents relating to the Vietnam War in 1967 that later became the Pentagon Papers. The Pentagon Papers were commissioned to document the mistakes that were made by the United States in both policy and the way in which we fought. The Pentagon Papers documented the stages of deception of the Vietnam War throughout 4 administrations. Truman began United States involvement by monetarily supporting the French in Indochina. Eisenhower went against the decision to reunite North and South Vietnam made in the 1954 Geneva Accords by supporting the Diem administration to govern the South and sending in CIA operatives. This covertly ignored the legitimacy of the Northern Communists. Kennedy pressured the Diem administration to accept 15,000 American advisors and then proceeded to support a coup to overthrow the Diem's leadership. Johnson broadened the scope of the war by expansive bombing in North Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos because of the Viet Cong's elusiveness, despite saying numerous times in his 1964 campaign, "We seek no wider war." The Gulf of Tonkin incident proved the deceitfulness of the Johnson administration, as they claimed to have been unaware that South Vietnamese ships were in North Vietnamese territory. However, the Pentagon Papers proved that the United States was aiding them all along. The public was utterly misled by each administration's account of the war. All of the presidents were informed by several advisors that the war was unwinnable, yet continued to increase involvement in Vietnam just to save face. The policy and results of the Vietnam War that became known through the Pentagon Papers were a severe contradiction to decades of assurance that the war was going well. Daniel Ellsberg played a major role in the creation of the policy for the Vietnam War while working at a think tank known as the Rand Corporation. Ellsberg then began working at the Pentagon under Robert McNamara, helping to compose the Pentagon Papers. In 1965, he served as a civilian on special assignment in Vietnam, studying counterinsurgency for the United States State Department. Ellsberg had always been a war hawk, but after his time in Vietnam, he returned home as a strong opposer of war. This change in character caused Daniel Ellsberg to steal the classified Pentagon Papers in 1971 and proceed to leak them to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and other major newspapers. Ellsberg justified releasing the Pentagon Papers, saying, "The whole focus has been on the risks of truth-telling, the risks of openness, which are the risks of democracy, of separation of powers. I've really heard nothing at all about the risks of a closed society of silence, of lies." On June 13, 1971, the New York Times published its first story on the Pentagon Papers. The United States government was embarrassed after the Pentagon Papers were released. They sued the New York Times, which became a landmark decision for the Supreme Court, decided on June 30, 1971. The court came to a conclusion saying, to find that the president has inherent power to halt the publication of news by the resort to the courts would wipe out the First Amendment and destroy the fundamental liberty and security of the very people the government hopes to make secure. This established that the media did indeed have the right to speak out against the government, truly exercising their right to freedom of speech. Ellsberg's trial for the release of the Pentagon Papers under the Espionage Act of 1918 began in early 1972. Ellsberg remembers, "I was the first person ever indicted for a leak of classified information. I was prepared to go to prison." On May 11, 1973, the judge in the Pentagon Papers trial dismissed all charges, not only vindicating the defendant, but also chastising the government. The Pentagon Papers were a catalyst in the Nixon administration's struggle with the media as he became obsessed with keeping secrets and stopping leaks. It was this paranoia of left-wing conspiracy that led to the creation of the White House Special Investigations Unit known as the Plumbers. He went as far as to have the Plumbers break into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatrist's office in an attempt to obtain information to discredit him. The release of such confidential materials also served as a threat to national security.
Security breach of the greatest magnitude of anything I've seen.
Well, what's being done about it then? I mean, did we know this was coming out?
No, we did not, sir.
Nixon responded to the Pentagon Papers saying, "Now listen here, printing top secret information. I don't care how they feel about the war, whether they're for or against it. They can't and should not do this and attack the integrity of government, and by God, I'm gonna fight that son of a bitching paper." The Pentagon Papers diminished much of the remaining support for the Vietnam War and Nixon's administration, creating a lasting distrust in government. This obsession culminated in Watergate, which destroyed all remaining trust in government. In the post-9/11 world, the national security debate has once again been brought to the forefront. In 2002, the Department of Homeland Security was developed with the responsibility to protect the country and prevent further attacks. This shifted the balance between the people's right to know and what must be kept secret for the purpose of national security. Since Daniel Ellsberg, there have been other whistleblowers wanting to expose the wrongdoing of the government. In early 2013, Edward Snowden released a number of military and diplomatic materials to WikiLeaks through his position at the NSA. It is debated whether what Snowden and others are doing is treason or heroic in trying to inform citizens of what their government is actually doing behind their backs. There is a fine line between the government's responsibility to protect its citizens and the people's right to know whether the government's actions are upholding their democratic ideals. The Pentagon Papers question the government's intentions and whether they were operating under the best interests of their citizens. Furthermore, the release of the Pentagon Papers and the resulting court cases reaffirmed the right to freedom of speech and freedom of information that the Founding Fathers intended. These basic rights are what allow the United States to remain a free democracy.
I absolutely believe that access to information is the foundation of our sort of body politic. It is what makes citizens informed citizens. It is what engages them in government, gets them to vote, gets them committed to important causes. And so the burden should always be on government to justify why it's not releasing information, rather than the burden on the public to get the information.
The press acts as a fourth branch of government in order to keep it accountable for its actions and transparent to the people. Abraham Lincoln once said, "Let the people know the facts and the country will be safe." The United States' founding ideals rest on the fact that it is an open society where all citizens have the ability to express their beliefs.